G'day all, Mark from Southern Cross Amateur Astro here with another astrophotography tool video user guide. In this one we're going to have a look at the camera tab, and this comes in a couple of different versions depending on what type of camera you have connected. So I'm going to go through and I'll show you with both the CCD and CMOS and the DSLR the information that's on there and what you do on it. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so we'll start out this one by going through what's common for both settings, no matter what camera you have. We'll start at the top here. Of course, you have your camera connect and disconnect. Now, to connect a camera, I'm going to disconnect this one. If you've already set up your camera, you simply hit connect and it will connect to the camera as long as it knows what camera it is. Now, if you want to connect a different camera, turn off cooling aid, don't need that. You go disconnect. Yeah, I'm going to do that. If you hold down shift and connect, it lets you choose the particular camera you want, whether you're using a Canon EOS or a Nikon, or one run by either native drivers or an ASCOM driver. I'm not going to change it now. I'll show you changing it later on when I switch over to the EOS for the other part. So that's what you get in there. I'm just going to click on OK and it will connect again to that camera eventually. Okay, then you have your start and stop buttons. Turn off cooling aid. I'm going to turn the cooler off. Yes. Now your start and stop buttons seem pretty straightforward. You hit start, it starts the selected plan. You hit stop, it stops the selected plan. Pretty simple, straight up, but there are a number of things that you can do with it. First of all, I'll just hit start. I'm going to get a few pop-ups here because I haven't cooled the camera and I don't have a filter wheel connected and PhD 2's not connected. So there you go, I've started an image, and as you see on the left here, it's started. And then you have your pause button. Just pushing pause will, at the completion of this image, pause the image. Pause the plan and wait for you to do something. So then you just need to hit resume and it will resume the plan. Now if you hold down shift and pause, what it does is restarts the current exposure. So holding down shift and clicking on pause restarts the current exposure. So that's what you got there. Now if you hold down control and click on it, you stop the current exposure and then it pauses the plan at that time. So a shift click will just restart the exposure, a control click restarts the exposure but with a pause until you resume. So now I can hit resume and away it goes. And of course the stop button will stop the current plan that's running. Now you have another option as well. If you click on shift and press start, yes, come on, yes, that's because I got nothing going. So you get your start options up here. Now the first one here is your loop plan execution, and this lets you loop a plan continuously as long as you require. If you set it to 0, it will just keep looping until the plan is stopped in other ways, or you can set a number of loops for it to run through. So that's what you have there, and then you can schedule the plan execution. You can schedule a particular time, deep sky darkness, astro night, or just night. And if you schedule one of these and the time hasn't been reached, your status over here, your monitor, will show as scheduled to let you know your plan is waiting to start. Now you can combine your loop and your scheduled plan. So if you set your loop plan execution to 0, so it continually loops, and then you set to one of your deep sky or one of your nighttime settings here, what it'll do, it'll start the plan, loop the plan through, but once one of these, whatever you got selected, is no longer true, it will stop the plan then. So if you set it to start at deep sky darkness, it will start and it will continue looping, but once deep sky darkness is finished, it will stop the plan at that point. So that's an option you have there as well. So you can combine these together. So with that one selected, loop plan 0, Astro night, it will start at Astro night and continue looping through until Astro night's finished. So you can combine them together. So I'm going to cancel them because I'm not doing anything like that. Okay, so that covers your connection, your start, stop, resume and pause, etc. Now the next part that's common is your plan selector. So you can drop this down. It gives you a list of available plans. There is a difference in here for what plans you will see. You will see different plans for a CMOS camera than what you will with a DSLR. It's only ones that will work with those ones. So that's the only difference there, but the plan selector is the same for both. Then you have the edit button, and that opens up the plan editor. I'm not going to go into that at the moment simply because it's going to get its own video later. So that allows you to edit this plan or create new plans, etc. So that's for later on. I'll go into the details here soon. That's different for each one. The other things that are similar are your object name, of course, your bulb seconds if you're using a bulb setting. You have the defined settings in here, which are the same basically for both types of cameras. Generally I just leave it on bulb and set the bulb seconds, and that does it. Now the only other thing that's the same is your image preview settings. So you've got your image preview settings, so you have it on for fit, which is what I've got there at the moment. You can turn it off, which is when the next image is done, it doesn't load it. Oops, I don't want region of interest. Then you have your 1:1, which is it's basically just the center of your image at 1:1, or you can go to 1:1 with scroll, which is the same thing. It starts off at the center of your image, but you can use these little arrows on the side here to move around the image in different areas. So that's what that one does. Depending on what I'm doing, I'll either leave it on fit or 1:1. So I'm going to leave it on fit for now. Now the other thing you need to know is when you're using a shoot to shoot, it uses whatever settings you've got down here for your timings. So it will use your settings you have here when you press the shoot button. Notice that there's also a couple of areas where if you haven't set a default timer, exposure count or whatever on it, the exposure time on it, it will also use here. I think automatic focusing and plate solving will use these settings if you don't set them up elsewhere. So you can set them in your filter, which is the one that takes priority. If you have a setting in here for your autofocus or plate solving exposures, they will be used. But in the individual programs settings, you have a default exposure. If you don't have anything set there, then it will use what's in here. So the priority is what's set on your filter wheel settings, followed by what's in the program, the particular tool itself. And if there's nothing there, it will use your settings off your camera tab. And that's the same for live view. It will use this. Live view also uses the same settings. When you hit live view, it's not going to do me much good because I've got black ones. I've got the camera just connected with a cover on it, so that's all that's going to get you. So that's just a warning that your live view and your shoot by default will use these settings. And that's it for the common stuff. Now we need to go in for each type of camera and do them. Now into what's specific for your dedicated Astro cams, and we'll start out with your plan list here. They both have plan lists, but what's displayed is different. So you've got your line numbers, your exposure, then you'll have your camera binning, the gain you have set, offset if you're using one in there, your pauses, the count for the images, and the filter if you're using one. So that's what's displayed there. But if you go down on the bottom right here, you've got two little buttons, and if you click them, they will remove the gain and the offset columns. So if you don't need them, you can turn them off. I leave the gain on, but I turn off the offset because that it can be set elsewhere. Now, of course, you've got your bulb exposure and your bulb and your timings, which are the same for both cameras. But then under here you've got your binning. This will list the binnings your camera is capable of, and you select what binning you want there. And on the right hand side here you have your gain setting. Just remember that when you have these set, they are used by your shoot button, by live view by default, and in other areas if you haven't previously specified a time, exposure, etc. From your filter wheel settings or in point craft or autofocus aid. There may be other areas, but they're the main ones. The next line is your region of interest, and this is the big advantage of the dedicated cameras. You can select a region of interest to look at on your images. Now that can zoom in on a very small target or whatever. So if you have some settings, 1/16, 1/8, 1/4 and a half, these can be set however you like to what you want. If center region of interest is turned on, which it is here at the moment, as you see it's brighter and it's got a little star in the corner there, that means it's turned on. The region of interest will be centered in the middle of your image. Now if you turn that off, you can instead left click on your image somewhere and it will set the region of interest to that point. But to see that region of interest you then need to take another exposure. I can't do it here because I'm not set up to take an image. It's the middle of the day, my camera is just there with a cover on, but that's what you get if you want to put the region of interest somewhere else in your image. But generally you'll probably end up going with center it, and because that's where your target will generally be. So that's up to you if you want to use that. The advantage of it is it gives you smaller image sizes. Like I said, you zoomed in a bit, but the actual size of the image file will be smaller as well when you download it. Then you have your cooling settings, if you have one that needs it. So you can turn your cooler on or off. By default, APT will stop the automatic cooling unless you've changed the setting in your APT settings, and just leave it at whatever it is at the time. So you got your cooler on. Yes, so it sets it and holds it at that particular temperature. Then you've got your cooling aid, which allows you to cool the camera. You can set a target that you want to go to, -5, -10 or whatever. The cooling step degrees, this is how far it'll try and move in one go. It doesn't do it all at once, but it will move there, slowly cool down to there. Then it will pause for whatever pause seconds you've got set here, and then start cooling again. It's a much better way to cool your camera than just letting the camera run on and do a quick cool, which can cause condensation, etc. with your camera. So you set the cooling steps, how many degrees you want it to do, and how long between each movement it does. And then you have your timeout, and what this is, if you've set a figure here and it can't reach that particular step down within that time, this isn't your overall time, this is just the time to complete one cooling step, it will time out at that one and stop cooling attempts. Then you have your start CCD temperature. If you start cooling, it will show you the temperature of your CCD, so mine would show 25 degrees at the moment. Then you have your set limit, which will be your current temperature minus your cooling step, and then the actual current one while it's cooling. I'll just quickly turn this on for you so you can see what's going on. So start CCD is 25, it's set it to 18, and it will slowly cool down to 18, wait 10 seconds, and then start cooling, then down to 11, etc, etc. So I'm going to stop that for now because I don't need to cool it. Okay, and the next thing you have is your warming aid, which does exactly the reverse. It slowly warms up your camera. It doesn't have to get to the particular temperature, that your ambient temperature, as long as it's within 5 or 10 degrees. It's just to prevent the shock of suddenly being warmed up to a high temperature from a low. You can sensor shock, and you'll have dew and everything else, and fogging up and everything else of it. It's just a slower way to warm the camera gradually rather than fast. But all the settings are the same. You can either use your target yourself, or if you've got a temperature sensor of some sort connected, it will take an offset you set in your other settings, in your APT settings, and apply that to calculate the temperature it wants to go to. So in your settings for your CCD, you have over here, you have the target offset. So I've got it set at 5 degrees, so when I've got a temperature probe connected, it will set a target 5 degrees below the ambient temperature. So that's what that does there. And again, the pause and the timeout are the same. Same with the start, what you're going to set it to, and the current CCD temperature. I've got no good turning it on, so I won't worry about it. I'm going to turn the cooler off again. Yes, it doesn't need it. Okay, and finally down the bottom, when you have your camera name, which is also you can set in your settings. Where are we? Alt S. Oh, what am I doing? Alt S. Oh, I keep hitting the window key. So in your settings, you can, under your CCD, oh, is it under that? Yeah, you can set the camera name down here. So that lets you set the camera name to whatever you'd like, and it tells you whether it's a mono or a color camera you're using. So that's that there. And finally, you have your settings buttons, and these are some settings, and it'll be different depending on what camera you've got. If you go in here, you can set your, it tells you your maximum and minimum gain, your black level offset, and this is usually, I don't know why it's not set in here, but when you look down here, when you connect the camera, if you're using the native drivers and the camera supports it, it will tell you what the best settings are for each one, or what the default settings are for each one. So high dynamic range is a 0 gain with 2 offset. Unity is 120, so that's your normal one. That's what I normally shoot at, with an offset of 6. And for the lowest noise is 390 with an offset of 30. So I normally set mine just at 6. Then you have USB speed percent, and you only need to really worry about this if you're having troubles with the image transfers from your camera to your computer. This can vary. You might be 60%, you might need to go down to 40% or whatever. It's just to help improve your transfer if you're having problems. I've never had any problems, so I don't worry about it. It would just use the driver default. So this is just to override the driver default. If your camera has a dew heater, mine doesn't, so I can't do anything with that, but if it has a built-in dew heater, you can turn it on and off there. And you can also change your red and blue balance if you've got a color camera. So I'll select that to OK. Now that's it for everything on there. I don't need to change anything else. So that's a CCD and CMOS camera. That's what you have on your camera tab. Next we're going to go take a look at the DSLR. So I'll be right back with that one. So now to take a look at the DSLR mode for the camera tab. Up the top it's all the same. The only difference you will ever note is that your drop down list here for your plan selection, the plans for the different camera types are kept totally separate. So you'll only see in here plans that work with a DSLR. You will not see plans from your CCD and CMOS. And it works the same the other way. You only get plans for that particular type of camera. So that's the only difference you're going to see there. Next, you got a couple of difference in your plan list here. The ones that which are the ISO and the quality columns. I've turned off a couple of columns here, which you can do. So the ISO setting and the image quality you're using for that one. And of course you've got your AV column here. This is your aperture setting, if you want to have it there, and a filter column. But these last two, if you don't desire them, you can disable them. And you'll see that I've got one here that's 1/50th. When these columns are enabled, by default the column's not wide enough to display 1/150th. You can play around with the column widths up the top here, or just turn off your columns. You'll have to excuse my computer, it's going a bit slow tonight for some reason, to display the full 1/50th. So if you see a dash with a number beside it, that's 1, whatever that number is. Okay, quickly moving on. Now we've got down here is your exposure length, and that's not much different. It just displays whatever exposure length your camera can support. So in this case, up to 1/1/4000th. My 70D goes twice that, and but generally mine don't move off bulb. I prefer using bulb for all my exposures. It just makes life so much easier. Then you've got your ISO. This will again only display what your camera can support, and you just pick the ISO you wish to use for along with this. Then your image quality, and again only what your camera supports. These LM, S1 and S2 are all JPEG type files. Then you've got a RAW plus a large JPEG or a RAW, and that's what this camera supports. Other cameras I have support different. I've got small RAWs, medium RAWs, and combinations with JPEGs for those as well. It just depends on what your camera supports. Doing imaging, I don't need anything but the RAW files because I can edit them quite easily. Easier than a JPEG, that's for sure. Next is your aperture setting, and again whatever your lens supports while it's connected to the camera is what's listed here. So I've got an f2 100mm EOS lens on here, or EF lens on here, so it can go from a 2 up to 22. Generally I'll run this at 2.8 or maybe 4, just to step it down a little bit and improve the image quality a little. So you just pick what you want there. If you're connected to a telescope and not a lens, it will just list NA here because you can't change the AV anyway, the aperture anyway. The next different bit, excuse me, the next different bit is your image destination. And this can be either just on the camera, on the card in the camera, on the PC only, or on a combination of both. So you'll have a backup on the camera and on PC. I just leave it on PC simply because I don't have to worry about the free space on the card after a few sessions of getting full. Okay, the next little section here, this is an anti-vibration pause, and this is what's called mirror lockup. If you're not sure what mirror lockup is, when you use a DSLR, and it's only a DSLR, not on a mirrorless camera, they've got a mirror in them, and before it can take an image, it needs to flip that mirror up out of the way of the sensor, and then it takes the image. The problem is this flipping up can cause a little vibration. It's not much, but just a little vibration in your camera and gear, and that can lead to a little bit shaky stars or whatever. By using a anti-vibration pause, what happens here is the mirror goes up, it waits for however many seconds you specified here, so your camera can settle, and then take it to the image. Now, this is something you only really need to do if you're using short exposures, or a combination of shorter exposures and a really long focal length. Anything under 2 seconds or 3 seconds, I would not worry about it at all. Because one thing to remember is that the time you set here is added to every image. So it will increase your imaging time, but the fact is, once you get over a couple of seconds, the exposure is long enough where the light gathered from a star or whatever will be enough to overcome any vibrational distortion caused. So like I said, only very short exposures. If you're taking 5, 10, 15 second exposures, I would not worry about it at all. But to be able to use that anyway, you need to go into your settings, and on the main tab over on the right hand side here you have CFM, which is custom function mirror lockup automation. And if you check that, if your camera supports the mirror lockup, APT can control it for you. Now, if you're running a Canon EOS camera and you have something like Magic Lantern installed on it, Magic Lantern takes control of all the functions in the camera, so you will need to manually set up your mirror lockup through Magic Lantern or uninstall Magic Lantern. It's up to you. But if you haven't done anything like that, just check in this box. APT will be able to control the mirror lockup if your camera is capable. So So that's you have to have that checked to be able to use this. And then you can go in, you can set a pause for as long as you like. But as I said, you just need to remember that this is added to every exposure. So you have a look here over on the left hand side in the log. This plan here is 93 seconds for 8 exposures, 1.5 minutes. But if I put on a 5-second pause, which is be more than enough generally, you see that changes to 133 seconds in 8 exposures. That's because I've got 5 seconds here in 8 exposures, so it's adding 40 seconds to the total of the plan. And that's how that works. So remember, if you do enable this, your images are going to take much longer. So be careful with that. And that's why, unless you really need it, and you're sure you need it on really short exposures, I'd just leave it off anyway. But that's up to you. Okay. Next is your long exposure virtual control. Long exposure control. Now, for most cameras in the last 15 years or so, virtual is all you need. But there are some older cameras that you're required to connect with special cables, etc. I'm not going into that here, but if you do use one of those cables, you need to select the type of cable or trigger you're using to make it work. But as I said, most more modern cameras use virtual, so you should be right just leaving that on the default. And with the anti-vibration pause, with the mirror lockup, most Canon cameras since the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007, I think around there, Canons will work with it. I think Nikon don't get the support until about 2012, so you may not work with your particular camera. Now, we've done the long exposure control. The white balance, I just leave this on daylight. It doesn't worry me. I'm shooting in RAW, so the white balance will have no effect at all on that because I can change it in post. And stars are virtually daylight anyway. It's just very small bits of them, so it works. It's always worked fine. They never look really that bad in it, so I just leave it on daylight. It's up to you, but if you're shooting in RAW, it does not matter. Now, the final part is the camera details here. Now, with a Nikon, apparently I don't have a Nikon, so I've never done it. It just shows the camera model here. For the Canon, it shows the camera model. It also shows above that you've got the processor that's being used, so in this case a Digic 4. Then you've got your custom function ML, that's your mirror lockup. Now, this one's displaying a question mark. When I connect my other Canon cameras, it'll come up while this isn't turned on, or while I'm not using it, it will say off. If I use this, it'll then change to on. But for some reason or other, on the 1100D, this is the Rebel T3 and the KISS X50, I think it was, the equivalent camera to that. Canon didn't put it in the firmware on this camera. The camera is quite capable of it. APT can control it, but it's not in the firmware, and because it's not in the firmware, it can't report to APT what its status is. So that's why it gets a question mark. It's not as if it doesn't work, it does. And I think I might just show you how this works. Okay, I'm going to set a 5-second pause, and there's several things that will happen. As I said, your exposures will be longer, and if you watch up the top left here, you'll get a countdown with an A, and that means it's the anti-vibration pause is running. So I'm just going to hit the shoot button here, do a 1-second exposure. But you'll see you've got the A up the top there. It's counting up to the 5 seconds. Exposure's just been taken. Done. Now, you're not going to see anything in the middle here because the lens has got the lens cap on. I've just got it sitting on the couch inside. But yeah, that's what your mirror lockup function does and your anti-vibration pause. So I'm just going to set that back to 0 because generally I'm not taking that short of exposures the best of times. If I wanted to do something like that, I'd lower the ISO or raise the AV if I need to get longer. But that's it. Other times you'd have your virtual vibration port, well, short enough images to do that. You're doing darks or flats, and I wouldn't really bother with that. or bias and flats I should say, and you don't need the anti-vibration on those, so not worth having it on. But that's it for your DSLR version of the camera tab. So I'm going to leave this here before we get too long in this video. Wish us all very clear skies, and I'll chat to you later. Take care everyone.